An investigation by Spanish NGO has found that China has set up over 50 unofficial police stations in at least 21 countries. The unofficial police stations are allegedly being used to intimidate and silence Chinese dissidents abroad. Following the investigation, Dutch media found evidence of at least 2 unofficial Chinese police stations operating in the Netherlands. The Dutch Foreign Ministry says their existence is illegal. The Chinese embassy there says it is not aware of their existence. Anna Holligan is outside the Chinese embassy in The Hague. Have a listen.
This is, of course, the official base of the Chinese government here in the Netherlands. But according to the allegations detailed in this report, Beijing has been operating underground, undeclared policing units, ostensibly to tackle transnational crime and deal with administrative duties, but actually, in reality, according to the report, to carry out persuasion operations aimed at coercing those suspected of speaking out against the Chinese regime to return home. The original investigation was conducted by a Spanish NGO called Safeguard Defenders. It's called Chinese Transnational Policing Gone Wild. And in this report, they say the public security bureaus from 2 Chinese provinces have established 54 overseas police service centres across 5 continents and 21 countries. Now, Dutch journalists took that information and found one Chinese dissident based here in the Netherlands. His name is Wang Jingyu. He says that he received a phone call earlier this year from someone claiming to be from one such station. And during that conversation, he said he was urged to return to China to sort out his problems and to think about his parents. Since then, he says he has been subjected to a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation, which he believes is being orchestrated by the Chinese government agents. Earlier, I spoke to the Dutch Foreign Ministry. They said the Dutch government wasn't made aware of these operations through the diplomatic channels with the Chinese government. That is illegal. They said they would investigate and decide the appropriate response depending on the nature of any covert operations. They said they were concerned and police would be offering protection to Wang Jingyu. Beijing has also responded. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said what had been described as police stations overseas are actually service stations for Chinese citizens abroad, and that China fully respected other countries' judicial sovereignty.
That's our correspondent Anna Holligan reporting there from outside the Chinese embassy in The Hague. I'm joined now by Laura Harth, who was part of the investigation team that discovered these secret police stations. Thanks very much, Laura, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, 50 unofficial police stations across 21 countries. It sounds just extraordinary.
Yes, and it might just be the tip of the iceberg. These are the ones that we managed to document, just taking into account official Chinese authorities' sources. So we did not invent anything. We just took them for their word. And I think the most worrying thing of this is how brazen it is all getting. The introduction gave a quite good overview of how this persuasion to return methods work: threats, harassment, guilt by association, punishment of family members back home, sending covert agents abroad, or using these kind of stations to persuade, coerce people into returning to China. Obviously, as Safeguard Defenders, we know we've been documenting these kind of methodologies, especially in our prior report, Involuntary Returns. We know how this is part of a nationwide framework that has been set up by the Chinese Communist Party to really crack down on dissent and hunt people down across the world, to make sure that the overseas Chinese, that the diaspora communities, and I'm thinking in particular also of those ethnic religious minorities, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Falun Gong, but also, for example, Hong Kong activists, how they would remain silent or be coerced to return if not.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's unclear whether 50 is just the tip of the iceberg here. Were you tipped off and your team tipped off about this? Or as you say, was it just the Chinese embassy officials themselves telling you this?
Well, basically, we were tipped off because we were following these kind of persuasion to return methods, we were tipped off by the Chinese authorities themselves. So we had reported prior that under Xi Jinping's signature international campaigns, Skynet and Fox Hunt, over 10,000 people had been returned in the past years. We knew of that at the beginning of this year. But in August of this year, the Ministry of Public Security, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security, stated they had successfully persuaded to return 230,000 individuals between April 2021 and July of this year alone. So I would say that was the tip-off that kind of made us dig deeper into this specific campaign of persuading people to return to China.
And is your investigation mainly focused on dissidents and people who may have spoken out against the Chinese government, or is it communities as a whole just living in these places, but being persuaded to either go back or for other activities?
Yes, exactly. So it's communities as a whole. You may have noted also during Xi Jinping's speech to the Congress last week, the Chinese Communist Party Congress last week, how he was stressing the need to reinforce the united front, to reinforce and bring in a way, the overseas Chinese into, the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And so we see that these kind of policing activities, which include explicitly monitoring the opinion within the communities by these stations, that this is kind of expanding. So within the people returned, we might actually also have people that did commit crimes, but we surely also have dissidents and critics, people that fled the regime among them. So it's really a net cast very wide that catches all. And I just wish to highlight that even when people may have committed crimes, that one, obviously there's a presumption of innocence that needs to be respected, and two, that there's official international police and judicial cooperation mechanisms that need to be followed, but the Chinese authorities obviously choose not to and pursue these illegal policing means across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's quite disturbing about what's come out of the Netherlands is that the authorities in the Netherlands say they didn't know about the existence of these police stations. And I wonder in your investigation whether some of the authorities of the 21 countries that you may have spoken to, do they know they exist?
So none of the authorities that have spoken to us have stated that they knew of it. We don't have any reason to believe that they did. We just uncovered some evidence that in Italy, there might have been some awareness of this, at least at a local level. But again, overall, these stations are completely clandestine, and definitely the kind of operations they are running are clandestine. And just to add to that, even if there's not a station, we know that the networks that they're using, the people they're hiring to do this, maybe through other means, through other kinds of organizations, will be involved in these kind of threats and harassment campaigns. So wider investigations into the phenomenon are definitely needed, even beyond the stations, which are obviously the most sensational part of it, I would say.